I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
The most explosive moment at Balmoral did not happen before cameras, beneath chandeliers, or during a carefully rehearsed royal announcement. It happened behind a closed door, when senior aides examining preparations for the Royal Foundation Summit discovered something connected directly to Prince Harry. Within hours, the atmosphere changed. William became guarded, Charles went unusually quiet, and the private finding that was never supposed to leave Balmoral began moving through the palace. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William arrived expecting order, not another family fracture. The fictional Balmoral Royal Foundation Summit was a strategy meeting where senior royals, foundation advisors, household officials, and charity representatives debated public service priorities. The Royal Foundation, in plain terms, is the charitable organization associated with the Prince and Princess of Wales. For William, this gathering was meant to stay controlled. Instead, one confidential message pulled the past into the room. Senior aides reviewing summit correspondence reportedly found a reconciliation proposal from Harry. In that fictional account, the Duke asked for a direct meeting with Charles and William and offered to support a future youth initiative without demanding a senior royal role or formal position. William read the summary once, returned to the opening paragraph, and set it down. His frustration came quickly. Harry had reached Balmoral through private channels, yet the prince had not been told. Charles felt the weight differently. The king learned that his younger son had requested time with him, leaving him trapped between fatherhood and duty. Every response now carried two meanings. A private answer could reopen an emotional door, while an official answer could reshape how advisors interpreted Harry's place outside the working monarchy. The working royal structure, meaning family members who perform official duties on behalf of the crown, had already moved on without him. Then the tone changed again. Aides noticed the proposal was not written like a demand. Harry reportedly accepted that he would remain outside that structure, making his intention harder to dismiss as a bid for status. William did not soften, but the discovery forced a new question into the room. Had everyone misunderstood what the approach was really for? The deeper shock came moments later. At least one senior household figure appeared to have known about Harry's message before the summit and had chosen not to circulate it. William immediately asked for the chain of correspondence and wanted to know who received the first approach. What appeared to be a leak about Harry was about to become something far more dangerous, a test of trust between the very people gathered inside Balmoral. Behind every palace argument stood something far more personal than titles, foundations, or protocol. There were three men, separated by years of resentment and silence, each carrying a different version of the same family collapse. Harry wanted his message heard. William feared reopening wounds he had struggled to contain. And Charles, seated between those two realities, faced the possibility that the summit had forced him toward a decision he had repeatedly postponed. Harry had made one point unusually clear in the fictional proposal. Family conversation had to come before public cooperation. His offer to support a Royal Foundation project was secondary. The Royal Foundation, in simple terms, is the charitable organization used by the Prince and Princess of Wales to support long-term public causes. The Duke was not asking to walk back into his old position. He was asking whether his father and brother were still willing to speak to him as family. William could not separate that request from responsibility. As the future king and one of the central figures behind the foundation, the prince understood that even limited cooperation with Harry could create expectations far beyond one charitable project. Years had been spent drawing firm boundaries between private family ties and official royal work. If those lines suddenly blurred, William knew the consequences would not remain private for long. William entered a private study and asked the same question twice. Who knew, and when? An aide explained that the message had passed through senior household channels before reaching the summit team. But the answer only deepened his frustration. The prince remained controlled, yet his insistence revealed the real wound. Harry had not simply contacted the family. Someone inside the system had decided William did not need to know immediately. Charles reacted differently. The king kept Harry's request beside him after the briefing, instead of returning it to the aide. His silence carried the heaviness of a father watching private pain become another institutional problem. Charles understood that palace machinery existed to protect the monarchy, yet that same machinery had now turned a personal request from his son into something examined, summarized, and quietly debated by others. Then one concession changed the conversation. Harry had reportedly accepted that there would be no return to the old royal arrangement. Any charitable cooperation would happen only after private family discussions succeeded, and even then under carefully defined limits. William studied that wording closely. The future king could dismiss ambition more easily than reconciliation, and this message was becoming harder to categorize as either. One sentence disturbed him most. Harry appeared confident that Charles might already be willing to speak privately. William immediately asked what had given his brother that impression. The aide hesitated before answering. Months before Balmoral, Charles and Harry had already shared one quiet exchange, and William had never been told. To understand why Harry believed Balmoral could become the doorway back into conversation, the story had to return to the private moment that started everything. Long before the summit, before senior aides opened Harry's proposal, and before William learned his brother had reached toward Balmoral, one private exchange had already shifted the ground beneath the family. It lasted only minutes. There was no announcement, no photograph, and no public reconciliation. But one carefully chosen sentence from Charles gave Harry enough hope to believe the door between them had not been permanently sealed. Harry had spent months communicating with the royal household under tight limits, with personal contact kept separate from official business whenever possible. The royal household, in simple terms, means the staff and offices that support members of the monarchy in both public duties and private administration. That separation mattered because even a personal message could become politically sensitive once it touched official channels. The Duke understood that one careless step could make reconciliation look like a campaign to regain status. Charles understood the danger just as clearly. The king wanted emotional contact with his younger son, but he also knew any future institutional arrangement involving Harry would require firm boundaries and William's cooperation. The monarch could speak as a father in private, yet any decision involving public royal work would affect the prince, the foundation, and the wider structure William was expected to inherit. Then came the call that changed everything. During a brief fictional telephone conversation following a family anniversary, Harry told Charles he no longer wanted to fight over titles, position, or status. He wanted one private conversation with his father and William. The king listened, paused, and answered with 6 words that Harry would remember. "Put it in writing, and I will read it." Harry took those words seriously. When the call ended, the Duke remained still with the phone in his hand, aware that his father had promised nothing. Charles had not offered forgiveness, a meeting, or a path back. But the monarch had also not closed the door. After years of distance, that distinction felt enormous, and Harry began shaping the proposal that would later surface at Balmoral. Charles made one decision that would eventually cost him. He did not immediately tell William about the exchange. The king convinced himself there was no reason to create tension before Harry actually followed through. If nothing arrived, there would be nothing to discuss. But what looked like restraint to Charles would later feel like exclusion to the future king. Harry eventually sent his request through a trusted administrative route connected to upcoming foundation discussions, believing a controlled channel offered the best chance of keeping the approach private. Yet that very choice placed the message inside the machinery William was responsible for helping oversee. And when William finally learned that Charles had effectively invited the written proposal, his anger shifted. Harry was no longer the only person he believed had bypassed him. And when father and son finally entered the same private room at Balmoral, the argument was no longer about Harry alone. It was about trust between Charles and William. The summit had barely begun, when the royal machinery gave way to something painfully human. William requested a private conversation with Charles. No communications staff, no foundation executives, no protective circle of advisors. Only a father and his eldest son in a room carrying years of unspoken frustration, and between them, the knowledge that Charles had opened a door to Harry without telling the man expected to inherit responsibility for everything that followed. William did not enter that conversation simply as an angry brother. The prince was also one of the central figures behind the Royal Foundation, the charitable organization that supports major public projects linked to the Prince and Princess of Wales. If Harry's proposal eventually touched the foundation, William believed he should have known before senior staff began discussing it. To him, the secrecy had transformed a personal family matter into an institutional problem. Charles tried to draw a clear line. The king insisted that telling Harry to put his thoughts in writing had been an act of fatherhood, not approval for a formal return. He had offered no position, no funding, no title, and no public role. The monarch had simply left open the possibility of hearing his younger son out. William stood beside the desk and asked the question that had followed him since the briefing. Why was I not told? Charles remained controlled and answered that he wanted to know what Harry actually intended before dragging the entire family into another crisis. The prince responded without hesitation. Keeping him outside the conversation, he said, had created exactly the crisis Charles claimed he wanted to avoid. Then the deeper wound broke through. William told his father that trust could not be rebuilt through repeated surprises involving Harry. The future king was not arguing that his brother had ceased to exist. He was arguing that every unexpected decision forced him to question what else might be happening beyond his knowledge. Charles absorbed the accusation, then pushed back. The king said quietly that he could not spend the rest of his life behaving as though his younger son had stopped being family. Charles held firm on one distinction. Conversation was not restoration. Listening to Harry did not mean reinstating him, financing him, or placing him back inside official royal life. The monarch wanted William to understand that opening a private door was not the same as reopening the institution. William left the confrontation still angry, but something had shifted. For the first time, he requested Harry's full proposal rather than the shortened briefing prepared by aides. He read slowly. The restrained tone unsettled him more than accusation would have. Then one paragraph stopped him. Harry wrote that if William believed his involvement could damage the foundation, he would step away completely. That concession forced Balmoral to confront a harder question. If Harry was no longer demanding power, who actually had the authority to decide whether he could be heard? Royal families can survive arguments. Institutions survive by drawing lines. At Balmoral, those two realities collided. Harry had asked for conversation, not restoration. Charles could offer the first as a father, but the second, any future connection to royal charitable work, could not be decided by emotion alone. And as senior advisors began defining exactly where personal reconciliation ended and institutional responsibility began, William found himself holding more power than anyone expected. William understood the distinction immediately, even if he disliked what it meant. The fictional Royal Foundation Summit dealt with charitable strategy, meaning decisions about projects, partnerships, and public service priorities connected to his work. Charles could encourage private contact with Harry, but the king could not simply place his younger son inside that structure through personal preference. The prince would have decisive influence because any cooperation tied to the foundation would ultimately affect responsibilities already sitting on his shoulders. Senior aides began separating Harry's proposal into two completely different questions. The first was personal. Should the family meet privately? The second was institutional. Should future charitable cooperation ever be considered? That divide mattered, because combining the two would make reconciliation look transactional. If Harry met his father and brother only because a project was being discussed, every motive could be questioned before the conversation even began. William absorbed that burden in silence. When advisors told him the final institutional boundary had to come from him, the future king stepped away from the discussion. Refusing Harry completely might look punitive, especially after reading a proposal that accepted strict limits. But accepting too much could reopen the uncertainty the family had spent years trying to contain. Either choice would carry consequences far beyond one meeting. Charles watched his eldest son struggle with a responsibility he had never expected to inherit that morning. The king finally understood that his earlier decision to keep the private exchange quiet had done more than upset William. It had pushed a complicated judgment onto him without warning. The monarch had acted as a father, but now the prince was being forced to think like a future sovereign. Then advisors offered a compromise. No royal role would be discussed. Harry could first meet Charles and William privately, with no foundation business attached. Only afterward, and only if everyone agreed, could charitable cooperation ever be reconsidered. William surprised the room. He did not reject the idea. The prince said he would consider meeting Harry privately, but Balmoral would not become the stage for it. The summit had to remain protected from family conflict. For a brief moment, the tension seemed contained. Then the containment failed. Word of Harry's private proposal escaped Balmoral before any decision had been finalized. And when the Duke learned that the request he had carefully kept away from public view was already circulating beyond the summit, reconciliation stopped being theoretical and became painfully personal. Harry had written privately because he wanted to avoid spectacle. Then the spectacle found him anyway. Word reached him that senior aides' discussions at Balmoral were circulating beyond the summit, including the most sensitive part of his proposal, his request to speak with Charles and William. What had been intended as a quiet step toward reconciliation suddenly risked becoming another public battle, and Harry's first reaction was not anger, it was humiliation. Harry received the warning in a private call. An aide explained that details of the proposal had moved beyond the small summit circle, and that palace teams might soon need to prepare a public response. Palace communications, in simple terms, means the staff responsible for handling official statements and media reaction on behalf of senior royals. The Duke went silent. He stepped away from the conversation for several seconds, then returned with only one question. Had William personally read the full proposal? That question revealed everything. Harry had expected disagreement. He had even prepared himself for rejection. What he had not expected was for a request built around privacy to become another public test of loyalty. Once the message leaked, every possible response could be twisted into something larger. A meeting might look like surrender. A refusal might look like punishment. Silence might look like contempt. The private space he had tried to protect was disappearing. William learned of his brother's reaction through an aide shortly afterward. The prince was told that Harry seemed less upset about the absence of an answer than about the fact that the appeal had escaped the room. For a moment, William's expression changed. He had spent hours questioning motive, procedure, and hidden decisions. Now he was forced to consider something simpler. Perhaps Harry had genuinely trusted the process to remain private. Harry made the next choice before anyone expected it. The Duke instructed his team not to issue a hostile counterstatement and not to publish his version of events. He refused to turn the leak into another exchange of accusations. That restraint mattered, because public confrontation had often deepened the family's divisions before. This time, he chose silence over retaliation. Charles moved quickly as well. The king told his staff that the private family request would not be negotiated through competing statements. He also accepted responsibility for encouraging Harry to put his thoughts in writing, making clear that the younger son's approach had not appeared from nowhere. Then William made the decision that changed the temperature inside Balmoral. He asked for Harry's direct number. No aide, no intermediary, no carefully prepared message passed through household staff. William typed the words himself. For the first time in the entire crisis, the brothers were about to speak without courtiers standing between them. After years of statements, intermediaries, briefings, and misunderstandings, the turning point arrived without ceremony. William did not summon a committee. Harry did not issue a declaration. One brother simply contacted the other. The message was short, carefully worded, and stripped of royal language. It did not promise forgiveness. It did not erase history. But it acknowledged something neither man had been willing to say openly. They could not repair anything while everyone else spoke for them. William knew direct contact carried its own risk. Staff communication had become part of the problem because every private sentence could be summarized, interpreted, or treated as an institutional commitment. The prince made his boundary clear before the conversation went further. This would remain personal. There would be no immediate discussion of titles, duties, foundation positions, or any public return. The Royal Foundation, meaning the charitable organization connected to his public work, would stay completely outside the conversation. Harry accepted the call without knowing where it would lead. The Duke began carefully, saying he had never expected his written proposal to become public. William answered just as plainly. He had never expected to discover that proposal inside a summit. The silence that followed was awkward, but neither brother ended the call. For once, the discomfort belonged only to them. No advisor was translating it. No spokesperson was preparing a response. Harry then acknowledged something William had needed to hear. By approaching Charles first, and allowing the written request to move through private channels, he admitted that he had unintentionally placed pressure on his brother. The Duke insisted that he had been trying to reduce conflict, not create another one. William did not excuse the secrecy, but the prince admitted that one detail had changed how he viewed the request. Harry had explicitly accepted remaining outside official royal structures. William finally said what nobody inside Balmoral had expected him to say that morning. He would meet Harry. The prince attached one condition: they would meet on neutral ground as brothers, not as representatives of separate households or rival public positions. No promises would be made beforehand. No announcement would be prepared. The purpose would be conversation, nothing more. Harry accepted immediately. The Duke did not demand a public date, a guarantee of foundation involvement, or any sign that his former role might be restored. He simply agreed to William's terms. That simplicity mattered. For the first time, neither brother was negotiating through history. They were testing whether direct communication could survive the weight surrounding them. But Balmoral had already lost control of the larger story. Outside the family, fragments of the leaked proposal were spreading, and strangers were beginning to decide what Harry wanted and what William intended before either man had explained anything. Inside the family, the temperature had finally dropped. Outside the gates, the revelation was only beginning to explode. By the following news cycle, a private family problem had become a national spectacle. Harry's name dominated discussion. William's response was dissected. Charles's decision to leave the door open became a debate about fatherhood and monarchy. Yet the detail that captured public attention was surprisingly simple. Harry had not asked to reclaim everything he once held. He had asked to speak. That distinction transformed the emotional meaning of the Balmoral leak. Broadcasters quickly framed the disclosure as something different from the conflicts that had come before. Commentators debated whether limited charitable cooperation could ever work. But the more powerful question was whether personal reconciliation had finally become possible. The household responded carefully, stressing that summit business and private family discussions were separate matters. The royal household, in plain terms, is the network of staff and offices supporting senior members of the monarchy. That distinction mattered because a private conversation did not automatically create an official role. William faced the pressure almost immediately. At his next scheduled public appearance, the prince was asked directly about Harry. He paused, then refused to discuss the private exchange. That silence spoke louder than an argument might have. The future king could easily have corrected speculation or distanced himself from his brother, yet he chose to protect the conversation instead of feeding another cycle of public conflict. Charles watched the coverage with a different kind of tension. The king read the morning reports in silence, aware that every headline could push his sons back toward defensiveness. Yet something unexpected had happened. Neither William nor Harry had launched a public attack. The monarch had spent years watching private pain become public confrontation, and now restraint itself felt like progress. Then one fictional London morning paper captured the mood with a dramatic front page. Harry's private appeal. Brothers agree to talk. Outside Buckingham Palace, a small crowd gathered while television crews debated whether the leak had accidentally created the first workable opening between the brothers in years. Harry remained silent. William did the same. Their refusal to compete publicly gave the story a different emotional force. The palace moved quickly to clarify what had not happened. Harry had not been restored to working royal life. He had not been given a foundation position, promised official duties, or offered any constitutional role. Working royal life, simply put, means carrying out formal public duties on behalf of the crown. The breakthrough was personal, not institutional. That distinction changed everything. Balmoral had not repaired the family. It had not erased resentment, but it had finally separated two questions that had been tangled together for years. Could they forgive one another, and could they ever work together again? The answer would not be found in titles or palace appointments, but in the boundary the family finally chose to draw between forgiveness and royal duty. The Balmoral leak began as a threat to control. It ended by revealing something more important than the secret itself. Harry had not regained his former royal life. William had not abandoned the boundaries created after years of conflict. Charles had not forced his sons into an artificial reconciliation. Instead, all three finally accepted a harder truth. Repairing a family and restructuring a monarchy were two completely different decisions, and only one needed to happen first. Harry remained outside the working royal structure, with no new title, foundation appointment, official office, or immediate public duty emerging from the discussions. Working royal life, in simple terms, means carrying out formal duties on behalf of the crown as part of the monarchy's official public structure. That boundary mattered because William needed certainty that personal contact would not quietly become institutional pressure. The Duke could speak to his family again without automatically reopening questions the palace had already spent years trying to settle. William accepted that distinction. The prince agreed that private communication with Harry could resume under clearly defined personal limits, while Charles accepted something equally important. Reconciliation between relatives could not be treated as a shortcut back into royal work. The king had wanted his sons to speak again, but he now understood that healing the family did not require forcing the institution to move with it. Charles returned to the room where the first briefing had been presented after the summit concluded. The monarch looked toward the empty chair opposite him, then quietly told an aide that nothing more should be said publicly about his son's conversation. For once, privacy became the decision rather than the problem. The king had learned that protecting silence could sometimes do more for a family than controlling the narrative. William left Balmoral still cautious, but the fury had gone. The future king had protected the independence of the foundation while refusing to permanently close the door on Harry. His choice was not surrender. It was not revenge. It was controlled reconciliation, with enough distance to preserve duty and enough openness to allow something personal to survive. Harry's proposal had proven something nobody expected. The Duke was not demanding an immediate return to his old position. By accepting that royal life might remain closed while family conversation reopened, he gave William room to respond without feeling that the monarchy itself was being challenged. And that became the real verdict of Balmoral. The leak nearly destroyed the privacy Harry wanted, yet it forced Charles, William, and Harry to define their intentions clearly. Family contact could resume. Royal boundaries could remain. Balmoral did not restore the old royal family, because that version no longer existed. It created something more realistic, a narrow path toward personal repair, without pretending years of conflict could simply disappear. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.